G'day folks, Rod here. Hope you're doing well. Just thought I'd walk you through step by step a painting that I've recently done, and we've recorded this as a full course in the Learn to Paint Academy. It's over 6 hours in length. This is a project that I've done that is larger than what we'd normally do in the Learn to Paint Academy. So there's a number of things we have to factor in when we're scaling up to a larger size, and it's more advanced. I was doing this painting actually for myself as a finished painting to go out and sell, and I was doing it as a 900 mil by 600 mil, so it's quite a bit larger than most of the projects we do in the Learn to Paint Academy, and it's a bit more advanced. And there's more to it. Simply when you scale up to a larger size, you're going to have to deal with more things to consider, right? And so, with that in mind, I thought I'd just do a little video here that walks you through some of the steps. And obviously, if you wish to go into more depth and see me paint every brush stroke, then it's in the course, the brand new course, which is called Grampian's Sheep Station. If you're a full access member of the Learn to Paint Academy, it's included for you. If not, there's a link somewhere on this page where you can go and read all about the new course. And if the promotional price is still running, you'll be able to get it at the discounted price. So this is the photo. I love this subject. We have done this subject in some of our other challenges, but not in the same way we do in this course. So even if you think, oh, I've done that subject before, I'd put that thought to one side, because you may have painted the subject, but not in the approach and the amount of detail and depth and scaling up, etc., that we're going to do in this course. You won't have done it. So the subject is less important, I think, for developing your painting than the approach used in painting that subject. So this is the photo that I took, right? Sue and I stayed on this sheep station, and it's a late afternoon, setting sun. You can see the sun's quite low in the sky. It's creating all these beautiful highlights on the buildings and the sheep and the grass and on the trees and the trunks and so on. Now, I wanted to paint this on a 900 by 600 mil surface. So this photo, I can't use this photo reference directly as it is. So in the course, one of the things that I show you is how to set up a canvas to the same size as your painting surface, and then take the photo and drop it onto that canvas. And this is what I ended up with, okay? So it's cropped it in quite a bit, zoomed in a bit on the buildings, which is obviously the main focal point. So if I just go back, that's the original photo, right? You can see where I've cropped it right in, and I played around with the placement of the sheds and everything to get just the right composition that I was looking for. And so I was quite happy with this as our composition for the subject. Okay, so just quickly, I'll just go through the colours that I used. This is a more advanced painting, so I'm using a warm and cool of each of our primaries. So ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, they're my two blues. Cad red, as you can see here, and the alizarin crimson are my two reds. Yellow ochre, and then I've got a couple of yellows. So I've got yellow ochre for the warmer yellow, cad yellow medium, and cad yellow light. Right, and I like to use a few different yellows to help me get better greens. And for that reason, I also have Viridian, which is really a booster color, burnt sienna, which I didn't really use a lot, and titanium white. Okay, got a nice big palette area there, and I think that's important that you have a nice mixing surface with plenty of space. Right, and I'm using traditional oil paints. You could follow the same process with water mixable oils, acrylics, or gouache. I'm using my own brush set that I've developed. Many of you will be aware of. We have the brush sets available for sale, and this is predominantly what I'm going to be using. Now, when I looked at the photo, first thing I did was break it down into big shapes. I won't go through it all here with you, but in all the courses that we do in the Moore method of painting, we always talk about big shapes and identifying those and placing them down on the painting surface. And so I spent quite a bit of time really just analysing the photo and then picking out these big shapes. And I found that there were 7 big main shapes that I needed to include in the painting. And then what I did, a little bit different from what we normally do, right, is I spent quite a bit of time with a pencil, and I just placed in as best I could the big shapes. Now, with a bit more detailed drawing than what I might normally do, I don't particularly like using pencil. You can see around about the buildings area how I've smudged the pencil. So I'm not a big fan of using pencil, and in most cases I don't. But I wanted to get a more accurate drawing. And what I found was that gave me a really good feel for the subject itself, which I think is important. Ordinarily, I'll just paint in the big shapes with paint, right? But because this is a much larger painting than what I'm used to doing, what I normally do, I decided to draw it in with pencil, right? So that's really our step 2. We've got a 5-step painting process that we teach in the More method of painting, and I go through that in great detail in the new course for this project. Step 1 was subject selection and design. So I talked about that a moment ago, where I cropped it in and so on. Step 2 is to identify the big shapes within the painting, and you don't want any more than usually about a half dozen. This one's got 7. So step 2 is identifying the shapes and placing them accurately on the canvas. There's a number of different ways you can go about this. You can do it freehand, freestyle, just like through observation. You can do it using gridding methods. Some people use projectors. There's no right or wrong way to do it. I just sat there with the photo and just looked at it carefully and just, I used my pencil to measure up the edges, where the horizon line is and things like that, and worked everything off that. And it took me probably 40 minutes or so, 50 minutes to do this drawing, because I really took my time with it, right? So that's step 2, is getting the big shapes placed accurately on the painting surface, okay? And then step 3, we start our block-in. And with our block-in, typically we work from dark to light. And, we're working, this is step 3, our block-in of our values and our temperature, right? And this is an important step. I usually paint a lot thinner in this step because I'm using oil paint, and I work dark through to my lights. And we typically work using, there's a well-known book, Carlson's Guide to Landscape Painting, written about 1920, 1930, somewhere around there. Highly recommended. In there he talks about the 4 different planes of a landscape, right? So we have our vertical planes. They're usually our darkest tones. And then we have our slanted planes, which are like the mountains and so on. They're the next darkest. Then our flat plane, in this case the field, would be our next darkest. And then our sky, being the source of all light, is the lightest plane of the 4, right? So what you can see here, when I do step 3 of the More method of painting, our block-in, I'm trying to establish my values. So my verticals being the buildings, the sheep, and the trees, I'm blocking them in first with the darkest tones. As we work back into the distance, we come into the mountain range, and the mountain range is going to be, it's going to be a lighter value for a start, but it's also cooler in temperature. That's why we start seeing things blue off. They get cooler in the distance, warmer in the foreground. So that's step number 3 of the More method of painting. And that continues on, right? So I put in a sort of a dark wash into the foreground here, but you can notice it's got a kind of a warm temperature to it. And you can see here I'm putting in the cooler sky here. Now, I did actually use an additional colour that I don't normally use, which was cerulean into the sky there for the blue. Okay, so I did have 3 blues in there. But it's pretty rare for me to do that. I only did it because it's a larger painting, a bit more advanced, and I just wanted to push the temperature range in there a bit more. Okay, so you can see this is all still part of the block-in process here that I'm doing. I have different approaches to how I block in, but in this particular case, blocking in the sky as part of the block-in. So that's step 3, and then step 4. I usually let it tack off a bit, dry off a bit, and then I come back and I go, okay, now we need to start modeling up each of the elements within the landscape, right? So the elements are the trees, the buildings, the mountains, the sheep, the grasses, right? They're what we call the elements within a painting. So our fourth step is starting to model those, right? Now, in our value step, step three, we're really just concentrating on the shadow side of everything, the dark tone. But to make anything have three-dimensional form and shape, and to make it feel like, it has volume to it or depth, we need a dark tone, a mid-tone, and a highlight tone, right? And so what we do in our fourth step, our modeling step, is starting to build up these elements with middle tones and more lighter tones or highlight tones. So that's what I'm starting to do here. You can see I'm working in on the grasses here, starting to develop those, right? So the element being the grasses, I'm starting to work over with the lighter tones over the shadow tone that I put in there originally. So, an important step, getting the modeling right. Now, usually what I do is I slow down at this point, and then I work my way around the painting to ensure that I have got, each of the elements starting to build up in the painting. Here's a better view now because we've got the trees now. I've got a mid-tone happening on the trees. And if I just zoom through here, you'll see me developing these elements. I'm darkening some darks and I'm pushing the middle tones and the highlights a bit more on the trees. Okay, a little bit on the trunk. See how, I'll just go back. See how I'm just putting the light in on the trunk there. If I just go back, or maybe I did it earlier. But anyway, you can see the light on the trunks, how that gives the trunk now more volume. I'll just put a little bit more dark back in there, just getting the ratio right. And, and I'm just putting a little bit of a shift in the dark tone on the trunk there. And that just gives that trunk volume, and it starts to make it look like a round sort of element within the painting rather than just being flat, right? And so we start just building up each of the elements. And this is the part where we take the most time in the painting, right? You can see I'm sitting down there and I'm continuing to work on the grasses. As they come forward, I'm warming them up, right? So warm colours come forward and cool colours go back, working into the shadows. And step four is our longest step. It's where we take our time and really develop up these elements. And we may need to come back in and do more passes on the different elements within the this particular landscape, or any landscape for that matter, right? So I'll spend time just really working my way around the different parts of the painting, working back into shadows, pushing shadows back up into light areas. And step four can take time, especially on a larger painting. Step four again being the modeling step that we go through to make each of these elements really come alive, right? And then step five is where we start to really bring it all together, right? This is the final sort of step. And I may have spent quite a bit of time on step four, the modeling, but now we come into the final step, step five, which is refinement, right? So at this point, we start to adjust edges. We look for anything that's jumping out off the screen that maybe is a bit jarring or commanding too much attention. We tone that back, and then we build up areas where we want more focus in our focal point area. So we might harden edges around the focal point and soften edges that aren't in the focal point. And it's at this point that we start bringing in details. You can see there I've got a little rigger brush. I'm putting in branches and little bits and pieces within the trees. And it's really only at this point that I then start to get into too many details on the painting. So this is our fifth and final step. And again, step 4 and 5, I really slow down and really take my time in getting it right and getting each of the elements right so that it hangs together. Here's the final painting and in the frame. And I always like to try and imagine what it might look like when people have it on their wall at home. So I like to put together these in situ type of photo references of the painting. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this walkthrough, and hopefully it'll bring a little bit more clarity to you around the 5-step painting process that we use. Now, again, in the 6-hour course I've just created for this painting, I make it pretty clear what we're doing in each of the 5 steps. So I'll just recap. The 5 steps are, first of all, subject selection and analysis and design changes if needed. Right, that's the very first step. Step number 2 then is identifying the big shapes and placing them accurately on the painting surface. Step 3 is our block-in, where we're just blocking in our shadow tones, but we're also focused in on dark to light. That'll create depth and atmosphere, but also temperature range, right? So warmer colors in the foreground, cooler in the background. Okay, so that's an important part of that step. Step number 4, we slow right down and we start to focus on modeling. So building up the elements so that they now have not just the shadow tone, but also the mid-tone and the light tones. Okay, and you can see that in the trees, in the foliage of the trees on the left-hand side. You can see there's a dark shadow area that's not getting light. And then as the trees come around into the light, we've got more mid-value greens. And then where it's facing the light, we've got our lighter yellowier greens, our lighter tones. And that creates form and volume, right? And then step 5 is that refinement stage, adjusting edges, pushing back anything that's jumping out and pulling forward our focal area, and final little details, little dots and dashes and little things like that that create all the effective details. Alrighty. So anyway, I hope this helps. If you are in the Learn to Paint Academy and you're a full access member, you'll have access to this course already in the learning section. If you're not and you want access to this 6-hour plus course, then click on the link below. That'll take you to the information page. And if it's still on promotional price, it'll save you money as well. And have a go at this one, especially if you've been painting for a little bit and you really are looking for a challenge to take your painting up to that next level. This project will do that for you because it's a lot more considered. It's scaling up to a bigger size, so there's more things for you to think about. And it's more of an advanced painting for those who want to challenge themselves and try something a bit more complicated. So if that's you, click on the button underneath this video, go and get all the details, get registered. We'll see you in the Learn to Paint Academy, and I can't wait to see your version of this painting, after you've followed along with the course here. Thanks very much for watching, and have a great day. Happy painting.